Most cases done by any American court follow what's known as a stare decisis, meaning that in order to be just and fair, cases must follow similar rulings that were decided in the past. What this means is that if a case was decided years ago and another similar case with the same condition emerges, the recent case will more likely than not end up with the same ruling as the previous one. There are a few exceptions to this rule, one of them being the landmark case of Miranda versus Arizona. Ernesto Miranda had a troubling background filled with a history of theft and sex offenses in different states. While not his first offense, the case of Miranda versus Arizona was the most influential as it is considered a landmark case that affects every American regarding the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. These rights are rights that belong to every citizen and person residing in the United States and serve as a form of checks and balances to prevent officers from infringing upon your constitutional rights. The Miranda rights originated as a result of multiple court hearings that made their way up to the Supreme Court and boosted the Fifth and Sixth Amendments in the Constitution. This case traveled to all the different types of court systems in order to reach a fair decision, and while he had prior crimes that he was convicted of, it was one of them that had national implications. It begins when Ernesto Miranda was interrogated for the alleged rape and kidnapping of 18-year-old Louise Ann Jameson after her brother-in-law recognized the vehicle he used to take her and reported it to the police. Miranda willingly followed the officers for a lineup and interrogation where he confessed to the crime and wrote a written statement to be used against him in court. The district court then used this statement to pronounce him guilty and gave him time to serve, which was 20 to 30 years in prison by Judge McFate. Miranda was originally convicted by Judge Yale McFate with Alvin Moore as his lawyer. The first conviction with Judge McFate used evidence that Moore objected to be used for the trial, which was his own written confession. After his conviction, Miranda's case was appealed to the state's Supreme Court. The Arizona Supreme Court affirmed that his rights were not violated, as in his confession, he clearly stated, "This statement has been made voluntary and of my own free will, with no threats, coercion, or promises of immunity, and with full knowledge of my legal rights, understanding any statement I can make can and will be used against me," according to editor for the Library of Congress, Partida Guadalupe. His lawyer argued that while he did make the statement, at no point during the interrogation did officials of any kind actually inform him of the rights he claimed to understand with full knowledge. This is where the American Civil Liberties Union heard and took interest in the case and worked to have it heard by the Supreme Court of the United States. After a 2,500-word petition to have the case heard, the Supreme Court finally agreed in November of 1965. On June of the next year, the court released its opinion, saying, "Prior to any questioning, the person must be warned that he has a right to remain silent and that any statement he does make may be used as evidence against him, and that he has a right to the presence of an attorney, either retained or appointed, if he cannot afford one." This meant that both the initial court and the Arizona Supreme Court were wrong in their decision, and if they wanted to uphold their conviction on Miranda, they would need to use a different piece of evidence, as the confession was now deemed null and void. While Miranda's conviction still ended up being the same, guilty on all counts because of witness testimony rather than a confession, there were other things that ended up going differently because of the Supreme Court's ruling. The implications of the Supreme Court's ruling were national, affecting the rights of everyone who would be questioned by any law enforcement official. The first thing this ruling did was review past similar cases. 2 cases during the same time period were overturned because of the new ruling along with Miranda versus Arizona, them being Vignera versus New York and Westover versus United States in 1966, while one case, California versus Stewart, upheld its conviction according to the United States government in their online record of court cases, United States courts. The effects weren't just seen in court cases, however. The Miranda rights are now something that every officer has to inform people who have been arrested and will be questioned for their crimes. Officers are now required to read anyone who is being stopped and will be questioned before the interrogation begins their rights, and they have to make sure the person is aware of these rights and can either choose to waive them or exercise them intelligently and knowingly. Stare decisis is the primary way of deciding convictions, and it is difficult to change a decision if it has already been decided years before in similar cases, It took 3 court hearings for the judges to give a different ruling, but the change was national. It took years, but Ernesto's case transformed the way officers deal with suspects in the criminal justice system. Miranda's case traveled from a district court to a state Supreme Court and finally to the United States Supreme Court. It wasn't the crime that needed to be considered more carefully, but rather the process of pronouncing him guilty. While it may seem that such an important piece of evidence, his written confession would have made it harder to convict him of his crime, he was still pronounced guilty, showing how the justice system can be both fair and just at the same time.